Don, the concept of personhood or selfhood is very important in trying to understand, what am I all about? You have what I'd call kindly an idiosyncratic view of personhood. Tell me why you think I'm not a person.
Well, I don't know whether it's an idiosyncratic view of personhood, but it may be an idiosyncratic view of whether we qualify as persons.
Okay.
I suppose perhaps at least from my view that what's fundamental observations in physics is that they're conscious perceptions or sentient experiences.
Okay.
And in the particular framework that I have, there's measures for sentient experiences, but there's no fundamental relationship between the experiences. Of course, there's relationships between the content of experience. I mean, my present conscious perception is rather similar to one I believe that I have a few seconds ago of also, looking at you and so on. But there doesn't seem to be a fundamental relationship that says that this conscious experience is directly related to one that I have had in the past. There's of course a close correspondence because there's a whole sequence of them in which I'm aware that I'm Don Page, and
and you have the memory.
I have the memory. So that
memory.
gives a good approximate thing. But I think if you start going into more extreme, you could, I could go back to the day maybe before I even knew what my name was and have different thoughts. And if you go sort of backward along and join up with a different Everett branch and go forward and backward and so on, I think I could have a sequence of conscious perceptions that with very tiny gaps could go forward and backward all the way between mine and yours. So I don't. In other words, I don't think.
Let's unpack this. So you're saying in a quantum understanding of reality, where there are many different worlds branching out at any moment, that your perceptions can, in different worlds, theoretical worlds or actual worlds, kind of can begin blurring with mine in some way?
Well, I just mean that it's sort of like tracks in the snow. You do have a discrete step, maybe from one step to another. So let's suppose, I don't know whether our perceptions are discrete or continuous, but let's suppose they're discrete, but they're small steps. There's a small step between my present one and my previous one.
Okay.
I'm just saying, suppose I went backward, but then I went forward along a different Everett branch, and then I went backward and forward. I think there could be a route in which I never take more than a very tiny step to get between my present perception and your present perception. So
now you're moving between different worlds,
between different, right. In some sense, I'm moving between different Everett worlds, but I'm only taking small steps in doing this. I mean, I'm going back to where something branched, and then I'm going forward. So it's like going back in the branch of a tree and going up forward on another one.
Right, and because you're doing that in different worlds, and each one you would have a different perception, so much so that they could be varied, that could come into mine, in a sense.
Yeah. So eventually, I think it could connect up with yours.
So let me ask the question in reverse. If you were to conclude that we really are persons or selves, what would we have to have that fundamental continuity between conscious perceptive states?
Well, I suppose there would have to be some label, some distinguishing thing that distinguished between my conscious perceptions and your conscious perceptions. And I'm saying that within in some sense within a single branch of the Everett, there is a pretty good distinction, because I can be aware that I'm Don Page and you can be aware that you're Robert Kuhn, and it can be pretty definite. But then if we start branching off, we can get to places where maybe branches where I wasn't given the name Don Page, and then maybe branches in which my memory was there. It could get right.
And so what you're saying, because of the many worlds, that gives us the fuzziness in terms of our perceptions, that it eliminates the certainty of their unity, because you have all these worlds that can branch off.
Yes.
Suppose I think this were the only world.
Okay, I mean, if there were not the Everett, then probably the branches would not come close together. I mean, probably going back along your world line or something, it wouldn't.
So if there were no multi-world, this is the only world we've got. Somehow the quantum wave collapsed. I guess could we be persons in that world? That single world?
I think more so. Although there still might be a problem, even if the world were spatially infinite or spatially very large, because if the world were very large, then there might be some places out there where there's a being very much like me, but just a little bit different. And then I go further, there's another that's a little bit different yet. And then if I go far enough out in space, I might find that eventually I get to one that's very much like you. Or maybe I go way out and then I come back to you. So,
yeah, but that's sort of like a twin. That's not really you.
Well, I guess it's a question of what really makes the distinction.
And that's the question of personhood. What is a person?
Yeah. So in other words, I guess I'm taking the view that it's in some sense well, you might say the content of the consciousness. And so if there's a copy of my body way out there in space, probably far beyond what we could ever hope to see, that copy will. I don't see a big distinction between that copy and me. I mean, if for somebody that's outside the universe, or somebody that looks down and can say, well, this one is in this particular situation, and that one's in, so that he can make a distinction. But from the internal constitution, there may not be a distinction.
I always think exactly the opposite. Somebody from outside could say they look the same, they behave the same, they're saying the same, they think the same, but inside, you really have your first-person experience, and that twin has his first-person experience.
I'm just saying if you go really, really far outside the universe.
I don't care how far you go.
Then you should be, I think you would have a twin that have exactly the same experience.
Well, you have the exact same experience, but the question is whether you have the exact same inner sense. And I think that's a fundamental difference.
Yeah,
you can have the same the physical makeup of all the atoms, all the spins, everything. Everything is exactly the same. It's not clear that the inner consciousness would also be the same. That assumes that the only way it would be the case is if you assume a 100% sure physicalist interpretation, which is possible, but not certain.
Well, I suppose I am assuming that it does impose on, but I mean, even if it didn't, you could still imagine that maybe you'd have to go much further, but then eventually you'd find a case where not only all the atoms were the same, but even all the conscious perceptions were the same. And if it were the same, I'm not quite sure that I see any real distinction. That it's just another instantation of me. I mean, it's not a different person.